"This trip is just for family," Robert told me with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. I was standing in the airport, my suitcase in hand and my heart shattering into a million pieces as I watched my own son cross my name off the passenger list. "Megan is going to come in your place," he added without even looking me in the eye, as if I were some annoying stranger. Claire, my daughter-in-law, smiled that fake smile I knew so well. "Go home, Antonia. This isn't for you." Their words pierced me like knives, but what hurt the most was seeing how everyone else looked away. My own son, my own flesh and blood, the child I had raised with so much love, couldn't even meet my gaze while they publicly humiliated me. But let me tell you how I got to that moment. Because this story began 3 weeks earlier, when I still believed I was part of this family. The scent of cinnamon filled my kitchen as I prepared Robert's favorite orange pound cake. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the excitement I had felt ever since he called me. "Mom, we have a surprise for you," he had said, with that sweet voice I hadn't heard in years. "A family trip, all of us together." Those words had been like music to my ears. It had been so long since I felt invisible in my son's life, ever since Claire arrived and slowly pushed me out of everything. Family dinners became intimate gatherings, celebrations turned into something small, just us, and I had become a nuisance they tolerated out of obligation. But this time was different. This time, they had included me. They had remembered me. They had invited me to be part of something special again. I spent days shopping for new clothes. I went into every store at the mall, searching for the perfect outfit. I wanted to look good. I wanted Robert to be proud of his mother. I bought myself a coral dress that made me look younger, comfortable yet elegant shoes, and I even allowed myself that pearl necklace I had been admiring for months in the shop window. The nights before the trip, I couldn't sleep from excitement. I lay awake imagining conversations, shared laughter, pictures we would take together. I envisioned dinners under the stars, walks on paradise beaches, moments when I would finally feel like a part of my son's life again. I checked my suitcase obsessively, each garment folded and refolded, every detail carefully considered. I included my medications, books for the flight, and small gifts I had bought for each of them. I wanted this trip to be perfect. I wanted to show them that their decision to include me had been the right one. The morning of the trip, I woke up before dawn. I got ready with special care, choosing every detail of my appearance. The mirror reflected the image of an older but dignified woman, ready to reclaim the place she had lost in her family's heart. I arrived at the airport an hour early, my heart pounding with excitement and nerves. I searched the crowd for Robert and Claire, anxious to see them, to begin this adventure I had waited for so long. When I finally spotted them near the check-in counter, something in their expressions made me hesitate. Robert seemed tense, avoiding my gaze, and Claire was whispering something in the ear of a woman I didn't immediately recognize. It was Megan, Claire's friend. But what was she doing there, if this was supposed to be a family trip? I approached with a smile, pulling my suitcase, ready to greet them and start what I believed would be the best trip of our lives. "Good morning," I said, my voice full of hope and excitement. It was then that Robert looked at me for the first time that morning, and his eyes didn't hold the joy I expected to see. They held something much worse. Pity mixed with irritation. "Mom," he began, and with that first word, I knew something was terribly wrong. "We need to talk. We need to talk," Robert repeated, and each of those words fell on me like drops of ice. He led me to a corner of the airport, away from Claire and Megan, who watched me from a distance with expressions I couldn't quite decipher at the time. I thought maybe there was a problem with the tickets, some last-minute change to the itinerary. "Mom, there's been a change of plans," he began, unable to hold my gaze. His hands fidgeted with his phone, just like he did when he was a boy and had broken something at home. "The trip? Well, we decided it would be better if it was just for the immediate family." "But I am your family," I whispered, feeling the words get stuck in my throat. "I'm your mother, Robert. What's more immediate than that?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he inherited from his father. "It's not personal, Mom, it's just... Claire thought it would be more appropriate if Megan came with us. She and Claire have a lot in common, and you... Well, you don't really fit in with our plans." I didn't fit in. Those words echoed in my head like a painful wound. 45 years after giving birth to this man, after raising him, After sacrificing my youth, my dreams, my very life for him, I didn't fit into his plans. But, Robert, my voice was trembling now. I've been getting ready for weeks. I bought new clothes, I cleared my schedule, I even canceled my doctor's appointments. I was so excited. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but it's already decided. Megan is coming with us, and you're going home. We walked back to where Claire and Megan were. My daughter-in-law's friend looked at me with a smile that tried to be understanding but only managed to be condescending. Antonia, I hope you understand, she said. It's better for everyone this way. Claire then approached, with that cold elegance that had always intimidated me. She wore an impeccable travel outfit, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Antonia, darling, she said in that sweet voice she used when company was over, it really is for the best. This trip is going to be very active, lots of walking, activities that require energy. At your age, you could get hurt. At my age, as if I were a decrepit old woman incapable of taking care of myself. As if my 69 years automatically made me a burden, a nuisance, something to be tolerated instead of celebrated. Besides, Claire continued, Megan and I have so much to plan. We're organizing some events for when we get back, and we need this time to coordinate everything. You wouldn't be interested in that stuff. I watched Robert nod at every word his wife said, like an obedient puppet. The boy who had once promised he would always take care of me, that he would never leave me alone, was now standing there, validating every one of Claire's cruel excuses. But you can water the plants while we're gone, Claire added with a smile that was meant to be generous, and maybe tidy up the house a bit. You know how we like to find everything perfect when we get back. There it was, the naked, raw truth. In this scenario, I wasn't his mother. I was their free housekeeper, the convenient woman who kept their things in order while they lived their perfect lives without me. Megan approached with my ticket, now replaced by hers. Thanks for understanding, Antonia. I really appreciate you making this trip possible for me. Making it possible for her, as if I had voluntarily given up my spot, as if it had been my decision to gift my happiness to a stranger. Robert finally looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of the little boy who used to run to me when he got hurt, who would hug me when he had nightmares, who told me I was the best mom in the world. Mom, please don't make that face. We'll do something special when we get back, I promise. Another empty promise, like all the ones he had made in recent years, dinners that were canceled, visits that were postponed, calls that never came. The loudspeaker announced the first call for the flight. My flight. The flight I had been waiting for weeks, the trip that had filled my thoughts with hope and joy. Claire took Megan by the arm. Come on, we need to check in. She turned to me one last time. Antonia, call a taxi to go home. And remember to water the plants on the balcony, please. I stood there, holding my suitcase like an idiot, watching them walk away toward the boarding area. Robert didn't turn back once. Claire walked with that elegance so many people admired, arm in arm with Megan, talking animatedly as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered the heart of a 69-year-old woman in the middle of an airport full of strangers. But I was still there, frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. People passed by me, pulling their suitcases, hugging their loved ones, living their normal lives while mine fell to pieces. A tear rolled down my cheek, then another, and another. I couldn't control them. 50 years of marriage had taught me not to cry in public, to maintain my composure, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman who never caused trouble. But there I was, crying like a lost child in the middle of the city's largest airport. Are you all right, ma'am? A soft voice pulled me from my trance. It was an airline employee, a young woman with kind eyes who was looking at me with genuine concern. Yes, I lied automatically, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. There was just a change of plans. She nodded with understanding. She had probably seen this scene 1,000 times before. Families disintegrating, dreams shattering, hearts breaking in the most unexpected places. Do you need help with anything? Changing your ticket, maybe? My ticket, of course. I had a ticket that was now worthless, to a destination I could no longer reach, for a trip that no longer included me. No, I whispered. there's nothing left to change. I started walking toward the exit, dragging my suitcase across the polished airport floor. Every step was an effort. Every movement required a strength I didn't know I had. The sounds of the airport seemed distant, as if I were walking underwater. I reached the taxi stand and stopped. Where was I going to go? To my empty house, to those four walls that had been my prison for the last 5 years, ever since I was widowed. To that house where Claire's plants were waiting to be watered, where her dirty laundry was probably waiting to be washed, where her refrigerator needed to be cleaned before her return. Taxi, ma'am? The driver looked at me impatiently. Yes, I murmured, and gave him my address. The entire ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about Claire's words. At your age, you could get hurt. As if I were a frail, useless old woman. As if my 69 years were a contagious disease to be kept at a distance. When had she started seeing me like that? When had I allowed others to decide what I could or couldn't do? I remembered my mother, who at 70 had traveled through Europe alone, who had learned to use computers, who had lived every day as an adventure until her last moment. But I wasn't like my mother. I had become this small, frightened version of myself, someone who asked for permission to exist in her own son's life. When I got home, I opened the door, and the silence hit me like a slap. That silence I knew so well, that had been my constant companion for the last few years. I dropped my suitcase at the entrance and went straight to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed defeated, small, insignificant. It was as if my whole life had been reduced to this moment, to this humiliation, to this feeling of not even being worth the price of an airplane ticket. I picked up my phone to call Joan, my only true friend, the only person who might understand what I was feeling. But as I dialed her number, I stopped. What was I going to tell her? How could I explain that my own son had replaced me with his wife's friend? How could I confess that I had been foolish enough to believe they actually wanted me on that trip? I hung up before she could answer. I got up and went to the closet, where my coral dress hung next to the new shoes I had bought for the trip. I touched them with my fingertips, remembering the excitement I had felt buying them, the hope I had placed in every choice. It was then that something inside me broke. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not an explosion of anger. It was something subtler and deeper. It was the moment I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I took the coral dress and held it up in front of me. It was beautiful, elegant. It made me look radiant. I had bought it to impress a family that saw me as a nuisance. I had spent money I didn't have on clothes for a trip I wasn't truly invited on. But for the first time in what felt like years, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I felt something different. I felt anger. A clean, powerful rage that started in my stomach and spread through my body like fire. It wasn't anger at Robert, though part of me hated what he had become. It wasn't anger at Claire, though her cruelty had been unnecessary. It was anger at myself for having allowed this to happen, for having become so small, so invisible, so desperate for crumbs of affection. I took off the clothes I had so carefully chosen for the airport and put on the coral dress. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. This wasn't a pathetic old woman begging for attention. This was a 69-year-old woman who had raised a son, who had maintained a marriage for 5 decades, who had survived the death of her husband, and who deserved so much more than what she was getting. I went down to the kitchen, still wearing the coral dress. The house felt different now, as if it had changed owners in my absence. I looked at Claire's plants on the balcony, the ones she had ordered me to water as if I were her personal gardener. I looked at the to-do list she had left stuck to the refrigerator. Clean the house, do the grocery shopping, prepare dinner for when we get back. I took the list and tore it into tiny pieces. Each piece of paper that fell to the floor was an order I would no longer follow, an expectation I would no longer meet, a chain I had just broken. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert. "Mom, we're on the plane. Thanks for understanding. Don't forget the plants, not even an I love you or we'll miss you, just reminders about the damn plants." I typed and deleted a response 1,000 times. I wanted to tell him what I really thought, to scream that he was a coward, to ask him at what point I had stopped being his mother and become his employee. But instead, I simply wrote back, "Have a good trip." Then I turned off the phone, went to my desk, and took out a checkbook I hadn't used in months. I needed to get out of there, to go anywhere that wasn't this house full of obligations to people who didn't value me. But when I checked my bank account, reality hit me. I barely had enough money for the month's expenses. My entire financial life had depended on Robert since I was widowed. He managed the finances, he decided how much I could spend, he controlled every dollar that came in or out. I had become a financial child, dependent on my own son's generosity. But then I remembered something. In the very back of my closet, I kept an old shoebox filled with documents I had never reviewed after my husband's death. Robert had taken care of organizing everything, but I had kept a few papers without him knowing. I ran up the stairs and searched for the box. My hands trembled as I sifted through old bills, receipts, and documents I didn't fully understand. And then, at the very bottom, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and several legal documents. The letter read, "My dearest Antonia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. There are things I never told you because I didn't want to worry you, but you need to know them now. The airline I inherited from my father was never sold like we told Robert. It's in your name now. The documents are in a safe deposit box at the bank. The combination is your date of birth. You are wealthier than you can ever imagine. Use this money to be happy, not to please others. I love you forever." My heart stopped. An airline? A safe deposit box? Wealthy? None of it made sense. My husband had been an accountant, a modest man who lived on his monthly salary. How was it possible there was a company I knew nothing about? I looked at the legal documents. Sure enough, there was my name as the sole owner of Solstice Airlines, a company that, according to the papers, operated domestic and international routes. The documents were dated just 6 months before my husband's death. I sat on the closet floor, holding the papers with trembling hands. My entire life had been a lie. While I was scraping by on a meager pension, while I was begging for my son's attention, while I was worrying about every dollar I spent, I was the owner of an airline. I immediately called the bank. After verifying my identity, they confirmed that I did indeed have a safe deposit box in my name and could access it whenever I wanted. An hour later, I was at the bank, still in my coral dress, standing in front of a metal box that would change my life forever. Inside were more documents, bank statements showing figures that made me dizzy, and another letter from my husband explaining why he had kept it a secret. I didn't want Robert to know about the company until he was older and more mature. I was afraid he would become dependent on easy money. But now that I'm gone, the decision is yours. The current CEO, Gustavo Mendoza, has been managing everything. He will explain the details. I picked up the phone in the bank manager's office and dialed the number on the documents. "Mrs. Hernandez?" Gustavo's voice sounded excited. "I have been waiting for your call for 5 years. Your husband asked me to keep the company running until you were ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, still in shock. "To take control of your company, ma'am. You are the owner of one of the most successful airlines in the country. Would you like to meet to discuss your options?" 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sleek office in the city center, listening as Gustavo explained that I was a multi-millionaire, that my company employed hundreds of people, that I had planes flying all over the continent at this very moment. "And my son never knew anything about this?" I asked. "Your husband was very clear. No one was to know until you decided what to do with the information." I thought of Robert, flying at that moment to his paradise destination, sending me texts about watering plants, treating me like a housekeeper while I was the owner of the very airline he was probably flying on. "Gustavo," I said with a smile I hadn't felt in years, "I need you to check something. I need information on Flight 3247 to Cancun, which left this morning." "Of course, ma'am. That's one of our flights." He checked his computer. "The Hernandez party, 3 passengers. Is there a problem?" "Not exactly a problem." I smiled more broadly, but I think it's time they met the real owner of the airline. "Gustavo," I said, as I reviewed the documents confirming my ownership of the airline, "I want you to do a very special favor for me. That Flight 3247, I want to know all the details about those passengers. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The Hernandez party, he murmured, reading the screen. Robert Hernandez, Claire Martinez Hernandez, and… Interesting. There's a Megan Solis who was added at the last minute, replacing an Antonia Hernandez. Antonia Hernandez. That was my name on the ticket I never used, for the trip I was excluded from, for the adventure they stole from me. But now, sitting in this luxurious office, looking at the financial statements of MY Company, everything had changed. What kind of special services can we offer our VIP passengers? I asked with a smile that Gustavo couldn't quite interpret. Well, ma'am, we have upgrades to first class, gourmet meal services, access to exclusive lounges, and of course, special greetings from the captain for important guests. Perfect. I want you to contact the captain of Flight 3247. Tell him he has the owner of the airline on board and that he should give her a special welcome. Gustavo looked at me, confused. The owner? But you're here with me. Exactly, I smiled. I want him to announce that Antonia Hernandez, owner of Solstice Airlines, is on board the flight. He understood immediately, and a knowing smile crossed his face. It will be my pleasure, ma'am. While Gustavo made the call to the pilot, I imagined the look on Robert and Claire's faces when they heard my name over the plane's speakers. The woman they had just humiliated at the airport, the mother who didn't fit in with their plans, the old woman who they thought might get hurt on the trip, turned out to be the owner of the damn airline they were flying on. All set, ma'am. Captain Raul Vasquez is delighted to make the announcement. He says it's an honor to know the owner is personally monitoring the quality of service. Excellent. Now, tell me, Gustavo, what do I need to know about my company? The next 2 hours were one revelation after another. My husband had inherited a small aviation company from his father and had turned it into an empire. We had contracts with luxury hotels, operated charter flights for celebrities, and our annual revenue was more than I had spent in my entire life. Your husband reinvested all the profits into the company, Gustavo explained. He lived modestly so no one would suspect, but you are one of the wealthiest women in the country. Meanwhile, my phone began to ring insistently. Robert, I let it ring. Claire, I ignored the call. Megan, why would my daughter-in-law's friend be calling me? I finally answered. Mrs. Hernandez? Megan's voice sounded nervous, almost scared. Are you really the owner of this airline? Hello, Megan, I replied with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. How are you enjoying your flight? The one that was supposed to be mine? We? Robert is in shock. Claire can't speak. When the pilot announced that you were the owner, Claire went completely pale. I can imagine. It must be awkward to discover that the woman you just publicly humiliated is actually your boss. Mrs. Hernandez, please. I think there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Megan. I heard very clearly when Claire told me to go home because this wasn't for me. I heard when Robert told me I didn't fit in with their plans. And I heard when you thanked me for making your trip possible. An uncomfortable silence filled the line. I could picture the scene on the plane. Robert finally understanding that he had betrayed the only person who truly loved him. Claire realizing she had completely underestimated the woman she considered a nuisance. And Megan dying of embarrassment for being an accomplice to my humiliation. Do you want to speak with Robert? Megan asked in a shaky voice. No, I replied firmly. Right now, I'm busy getting to know my company. But tell my son that when he gets back from his trip, he and I are going to have a very serious conversation. I hung up before she could respond. Gustavo had been listening discreetly and was looking at me with admiration. Ma'am, if I may say so, I think your husband would be very proud. He always said you were stronger than you thought. It seems he was right. Now, Gustavo, I need to understand something. How is it possible that Robert knew nothing about the company? Did he never ask where the money for his university education, his wedding, the apartment we bought him came from? Your husband was very careful. He had a legitimate accounting firm that generated a modest income, enough to justify a middle-class lifestyle. He handled large expenses through fictitious loans or occasional bonuses. Robert never questioned a thing. Of course he hadn't. Robert had accepted every gift, every financial aid, every opportunity as something he was entitled to. He had never wondered how a modest accountant could afford to pay for an expensive private university or finance a lavish wedding. "And now what, ma'am? What are your plans for the company?" For the first time in 5 years, I felt I had real options. I wasn't dependent on my son's charity. I didn't have to beg for his attention. I didn't have to accept being treated like a housekeeper in my own life. "First," I said, getting up from the chair and feeling a new strength course through my veins, "I want to learn everything about this company. Every plane, every route, every employee." And second, I smiled with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. "I want to plan the trip of a lifetime." My phone rang again. Robert again. This time, I decided to answer. "Mom," his voice was desperate. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk to me?" I replied. "How interesting." "Please, Mom. I don't understand what's happening. The pilot said you're the owner of the airline. That can't be true, can it?" Dad was an accountant. We never had much money. I listened to his voice, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the automatic urge to comfort him, to make him feel better, to minimize my pain to protect his. Instead, I felt a strange, almost cold calm. "Your father was many things you never knew, Robert. And apparently, so am I. But Mom, if you really own an airline, why did you never tell us? Why did you live as if you had no money?" The question hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Why hadn't I known? Why had I lived for 5 years like a poor widow, dependent on my son's charity, when I was actually a wealthy and independent woman? "Because your father wanted to protect you," I finally said. "He wanted you to be a hard-working, humble person before you learned the truth about our financial situation, but he died before he could tell you. And you decided to keep lying?" His accusatory tone made my blood boil. Even now, even after discovering he had humiliated the owner of an airline, Robert found a way to make me feel guilty. "I didn't know anything, Robert. I just found out today, after you left me stranded at the airport like a piece of trash." An awkward silence filled the line. I could hear voices in the background, probably Claire, asking what was happening. "Mom, Claire wants to talk to you." "I'm not interested in what Claire has to say. She told me everything I needed to know this morning at the airport." "Please, Mom. She's very sorry. We're all sorry." "Sorry? For what exactly, Robert? For publicly humiliating me? For treating me like a housekeeper? Or are you sorry because you found out the woman you belittled happens to be a millionaire?" Another long pause. The answer to my question was in that silence. "Mom, you know we love you. It was just a misunderstanding." "No," I interrupted him. "There was no misunderstanding. For years, I have been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I have accepted crumbs of attention. I have begged for an invitation to my own son's table. I have lived waiting for the scraps of affection you decided to give me." Gustavo watched me from his desk, clearly impressed by the conversation he was witnessing. He gestured, asking if I wanted privacy, but I shook my head. I needed a witness to this moment. "Mom, please, when we get back, we can fix all of this. We can talk. We can." "What, Robert? Pretend nothing happened? Pretend you didn't tell me I didn't fit in with your plans? Act as if Claire didn't order me to go home like a punished child?" "It was a mistake, Mom. Claire was stressed about the trip. I was nervous about work. We weren't thinking clearly." There it was again. Excuses, justifications, anything but a real apology, anything but acknowledging that they had deliberately hurt me. "You know what, Robert? You're right about one thing. I don't fit in with your plans. But it turns out, I no longer need to fit into anyone's plans but my own." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this afternoon, I'm going to start making my own plans. I'm going to get to know my company. I'm going to travel to all the places I've always wanted to see. I'm going to live the life I deserve, instead of the life you all decided to give me." Claire had taken the phone. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less sure than it had that morning at the airport. "Antonia, it's Claire. I wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. I truly didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated. "Claire, you told me to go home because this isn't for you. You treated me like a housekeeper. You gave me orders about watering plants and cleaning the house. Which part of that wasn't intended to hurt me?" I I thought you would understand. The trip was important for Megan and me. We had things to plan. And what am I in your mind, Claire? A nuisance? A senile old woman who can't understand important things? No, of course not. You're Robert's mother. Exactly. I am Robert's mother. Not your employee, not your babysitter, not your personal gardener. I am the mother of the man who claims to love you. And you treated me like I was less than nothing. I heard Claire start to cry. A part of me, the part that had been trained for decades to comfort others, wanted to tell her it was okay. That I forgave her. That we could forget what happened. But that part of me had died that morning at the airport. Claire, I continued, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, for years you have been pushing Robert away from me. You have turned every family gathering into a competition where I always lose. You have made my own son see me as a burden instead of his mother. That's not true. It is completely true. And the worst part is that Robert has allowed you to do it. My own son has chosen your comfort over my dignity time and time again. Robert was back on the phone. Mom, please, when we get back, everything will change. I promise. No, I said with a firmness that surprised me. I don't need your promises anymore, Robert. I don't need to wait for you to decide to include me in your life. I don't need to beg for crumbs of your attention. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in 5 years, I feel free. Free from expectations, free from disappointments, free from the desperate need to earn the love of people who have clearly decided I don't deserve it. Gustavo passed me a note. Flight lands in 3 hours. Any special instructions? I smiled as I read it. Robert was still talking, pleading, promising changes that we both knew would never come. Robert, I interrupted him. Enjoy the rest of your trip. When you get back, you'll find your house exactly as you left it. Claire's plants will still be alive, don't worry. But Mom, I won't be there waiting for you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt a silence that didn't scare me. It was a silence filled with possibility instead of emptiness and loneliness. Gustavo, I said, turning to him, I need your help with something. When that flight lands, I want a surprise waiting for my guests. What kind of surprise, ma'am? I want them to know exactly who I am. Not the pathetic woman they humiliated this morning, but the owner of the company that just gave them the trip of their lives. Gustavo smiled knowingly. Are you thinking of a special reception? Exactly. When they get off that plane, I want them to fully understand what they have just done. We spent the next hour planning every detail. Gustavo contacted the airport manager in Cancun, arranged a special reception, and made sure that Robert, Claire, and Megan would know exactly who had made every moment of luxury they had just experienced possible. Meanwhile, I made a decision I had been avoiding for 5 years. I called Joan, my only true friend, the woman I had known since college who always told me the truth, even when it hurt to hear. Antonia, her voice was surprised. How are you? I thought you'd be flying somewhere exotic with Robert. Joan, I need to tell you something. Can you come see me? Of course. Are you okay? You sound different. I'm more than okay. For the first time in years, I'm awake. An hour later, Joan was sitting in my living room, her eyes growing wider as I told her everything that had happened. The humiliation at the airport, the discovery of the airline, the phone confrontation with Robert and Claire. My God, Antonia, she murmured when I finished. I always knew Claire was a snake, but this is cruel even for her. Why did you never tell me what you really thought of her? Joan sighed. Because you defended her. Every time I tried to point out how she treated you, you made excuses for her. You said she was young, that she was adjusting, that Robert made her happy. She was right. I had spent years justifying Claire's behavior, minimizing her slights, convincing myself that I was too sensitive, too demanding, too needy. And Robert, Joan continued, that boy you raised has become a man who lets his wife treat his mother like garbage. The words hurt because they were true. The sweet boy I had raised, who had once promised to always take care of me, had become a stranger who chose the comfort of his marriage over respect for his mother. But now everything is different, I said. I have options I didn't know I had. I have power I didn't know I possessed. And what are you going to do with that power? It was a good question. What was I going to do? Part of me wanted revenge, wanted to use my new position to make Robert and Claire pay for all the years of humiliation. But another part of me, a deeper, wiser part, wanted something different. I want to live, I said finally. I want to live as the woman I am, not as the pathetic shadow I had become. Joan smiled. That's the Antonia I knew in college. The woman who was brave, independent, who wasn't afraid of anything. Was I really like that? You were incredible. You were the only one in our class who dared to challenge the professors when they were wrong. You were the one who organized student protests, who stood up for the shyer girls when they were picked on. I struggled to remember that woman. 45 years of marriage and motherhood had buried the rebellious Antonia under layers of compliance and self-sacrifice. You know what's the saddest part? I told her. I spent so much time trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, that I forgot to just be me. It's not too late to remember who you are. My phone rang. It was Gustavo. Mrs. Hernandez, I have news from the Cancun airport. The flight has landed, and your guests have received the full message about who you really are. How did they react? According to the airport manager, Robert looked completely devastated. Claire couldn't stop crying, and Megan looked like she wanted to disappear. They were given the letter you dictated and a special itinerary for the rest of their stay. The letter was simple but clear. It explained that all the luxuries they were enjoying, the 5-star hotel, the private excursions, the gourmet dinners, were courtesy of the woman they had humiliated that morning. It said they could enjoy the trip they had stolen from me, but that when they returned, they would find a very different world. And the special itinerary? I asked. Every activity includes a small plaque that reads, "Courtesy of Antonia Hernandez, owner of Solstice Airlines." The hotel manager will constantly remind them that they are enjoying the generosity of the lady they excluded from the trip. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't exactly revenge, but it was poetic justice. Perfect. Now, Gustavo, I want you to organize something for me. I want the best trip you can possibly plan. I don't care about the cost. I don't care about the distance. I want to see all the places I've always dreamed of seeing. When would you like to leave, ma'am? I looked at Joan, who was watching me with a proud smile. I looked at my house, filled with memories of a life that no longer belonged to me. I looked out the window at a world that was finally ready for me to explore. Tomorrow, I said, I want to leave tomorrow. Joan clapped her hands. Antonia, can I come with you? Would you drop everything to come with me on an adventure? Darling, I've been waiting for this invitation for 5 years. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt as if my life were beginning instead of ending. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, pure excitement for the day ahead. It wasn't the nervous anxiety of wondering if Robert would call, or the constant worry about whether I had done something to annoy Claire. It was the clean excitement of a woman who had finally taken back control of her own life. Joan arrived early with 2 suitcases and a smile she couldn't contain. Ready to conquer the world? She asked as she walked into my house. More than ready, I replied. And for the first time in a long time, my words carried the weight of truth. Gustavo had worked through the night preparing our itinerary. First stop, Paris, the city I had always dreamed of seeing but could never visit because it was too expensive or because Robert needed the money for other things. Then Venice, then Japan, and finally a week at a private resort in the Maldives. Ma'am, Gustavo had told me over the phone, I've booked the presidential suite in every hotel. You will have private drivers, personal guides, and access to experiences normally reserved for royalty. As I packed, my phone buzzed non-stop. Robert called every half hour. Claire sent desperate text messages. Even Megan had tried to contact me. They all wanted to talk. They all wanted to explain. They all wanted me to understand their behavior. But I no longer needed their explanations. For the first time in my adult life, other people's opinions about my decisions didn't matter to me. Are you going to answer them? Joan asked, watching me ignore another call from Robert. Eventually, I replied, but not until I've fully remembered who I am without them. A limousine arrived for us at noon. The driver was an employee of my airline, an older man named Isaiah, who had worked for my husband for 20 years without my knowing. Mrs. Hernandez, he said with genuine affection. Your husband spoke of you constantly. He always said you were the strongest woman he knew, but that you had forgotten your own strength. His words moved me in an unexpected way. My husband had seen something in me that I had lost sight of, something I had buried under years of compliance and self-sacrifice. At the airport, everything was different from the humiliation of the previous day. We were received like royalty, escorted through private corridors, treated with the respect the owner of the airline deserved. The contrast with the past 24 hours was so dramatic, it almost felt like a dream. The captain of the flight, the same one who had announced my name the day before, greeted me personally. "Mrs. Hernandez," he said with a genuine smile, "it is an honor to have you on board your own plane." Your own plane. The words resonated in my mind as I took my seat in first class. This was my plane, my company, my life that I was finally living on my own terms. During the flight to Paris, Joan and I talked like we hadn't in years. She told me about her divorce 5 years ago, about how she had reclaimed her independence, about the trips she had taken alone and the things she had learned about herself. "You know what the most liberating thing is?" she said as we sipped champagne over the Atlantic. "Discovering that you don't need anyone's approval to be happy." She was right. For decades, I had lived seeking the approval of my husband, then Robert, then Claire. I had measured my worth by how happy others were with me, by how useful I was to them, by how little I bothered them. My phone vibrated with another text from Claire. "Antonia, please, we need to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Robert is destroyed." I showed the message to Joan, who read it and shook her head. "Now that they know you have money, suddenly everything is a terrible misunderstanding." Exactly. Yesterday, I was a troublesome old woman who didn't fit in with their plans. Today, I'm the victim of a terrible misunderstanding. I typed a brief reply. "Enjoy the rest of the trip. We'll talk when I get back." But I knew that when I returned, if I returned, I would be a completely different woman. We landed in Paris under a golden evening sky. The city spread out before us like a fulfilled promise, like a dream that had finally come true. Not because it was specifically Paris, but because it represented everything I had ever wanted but never allowed myself to have. At the hotel, the suite was larger than my entire house. It had a view of the Eiffel Tower, a grand piano, and fresh flowers in every room. The manager greeted us personally, offered us champagne, and assured us that anything we needed would be available 24 hours a day. "Can you believe this is real?" I asked Joan as we stood on the balcony, looking out at the illuminated city. "Darling," she replied, "this isn't just real. This is what you deserve. This is what you always deserved." That night, we had dinner at the hotel's restaurant, a place with Michelin stars where every dish was a work of art. We didn't talk about Robert. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future, about the places we wanted to see, about the experiences we wanted to have. "You know what's the most incredible thing about all this?" I said as we sampled a dessert that looked too beautiful to eat. "What?" "That for the first time in my life, I'm doing something completely for myself. Not to please anyone, not to meet others' expectations, not to earn someone's love, just for me." Joan raised her glass. "To the new Antonia," she toasted, "to the woman who was always there, just waiting to be rediscovered." We clinked glasses under the lights of Paris. Two women nearly 70 years old who had finally understood that life doesn't end when others decide you're no longer important. Sometimes, true life begins at that very moment. 3 weeks later, I returned home, transformed. Not just because of the incredible places I had visited or the experiences I had lived, but because of something much deeper. I had remembered who I was before I became a shadow of other people's needs. Paris had given me back my love for art and culture. Venice had taught me that beauty exists to be enjoyed, not just admired from a distance. Japan had shown me the dignity that comes from valuing yourself. And the Maldives had given me the gift of inner silence, a peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. But the real change had happened in the late-night conversations with Joan, in the moments of solitude watching sunrises from places I always thought were unreachable, in the gradual realization that I had spent decades living a life that didn't belong to me. Robert was waiting for me when I got home. He looked thinner, older, as if the last few weeks had been difficult for him. Claire wasn't there, which didn't surprise me. "Mom, he said as I set my suitcases down in the entryway. We need to talk. You're right, I replied. We do need to talk. But this time, I'm going to speak first. I sat in my living room, in my favorite armchair, in my house that now truly felt like mine again. Robert sat across from me, nervous, like a child who knows he's in trouble. For 45 years, I began, I was your mother in the way I thought I was supposed to be. I gave you everything I had. I sacrificed my dreams for yours. I made myself small so that you could shine. And when your father died, I kept doing the same thing because I thought that's what a good mother was supposed to do. Robert tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. When Claire came into our lives, I allowed her to push me away from you because I thought a good mother-in-law was supposed to step aside. I accepted crumbs of attention because I thought it was better than nothing. I became a spectator in my own son's life because I thought that was love. Mom, I never wanted. But you did want it, Robert. Every time Claire disrespected me, and you said nothing, you were making a choice. Every time they treated me like a housekeeper and you allowed it, you were deciding what kind of man you wanted to be. And that morning at the airport, when you told me I didn't fit in with your plans, you finally showed me where my place was in your new life. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, but I felt strangely calm. I wasn't speaking from pain or rage. I was speaking from clarity. I'm sorry, he murmured. I'm sorry for everything. Claire is sorry too. She wanted to come apologize, but I thought it was better if we talked first. Claire is sorry? I asked. Or is she sorry she found out the woman she humiliated happens to be a millionaire? Robert couldn't answer that, and his silence was answer enough. Robert, you are my son, and I will always love you, but I am no longer going to live my life waiting for scraps of your attention. I will no longer accept being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. What does that mean? It means things are going to change. First, I'm moving. His eyes widened in shock. You're moving? Where? I've bought a condo in the city center, near my company's offices. I'm going to get actively involved in running the airline. Your father built something incredible, and it's time I got to know it. But Mom, this is your house. I grew up here. All our memories are here. This house is filled with memories of a woman I no longer am. The new Antonia needs a new place. I told him about my plans. I was going to create a foundation to help older women who had lost themselves in the expectations of others. I was going to travel regularly, exploring the world that had been waiting for me for decades. I was going to live every day as a gift, instead of an obligation. And us? He asked in a small voice. What about our relationship? That's up to you, Robert. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. I will not tolerate any more disrespect from Claire. I will not accept being treated like a nuisance, and I will not beg for your attention. Claire really wants to change. Claire wants to maintain access to the family wealth she just discovered. There's a difference. We talked for hours. Robert cried, apologized, and promised everything would be different. A part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to go back to being the accommodating mother who forgave everything. But I had learned something important in those 3 weeks. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same mistreatment to happen again. I love you, Robert, I said as he prepared to leave. But for the first time in my life, I love myself more. And that is not going to change. After he left, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the plants Claire had ordered me to water. They were perfect, green and blooming. I had cared for them, but not out of obligation. I had cared for them because I enjoyed watching them grow. My phone rang. It was Gustavo with news about a new company project. As we talked about expansions and future plans, I realized something wonderful. For the first time in decades, I was excited about tomorrow. 6 months later, my new life was fully established. My condo was a haven of peace and beauty. My work at the airline gave me purpose and satisfaction. My foundation had already helped 50 women rediscover their own worth. Robert visited regularly, alone. Claire had tried to reach out several times, but I had been clear. Respect isn't negotiated, it's earned. Are you happy, Mom? Robert asked me during one of our monthly dinners. I'm free, I replied. And freedom? When you finally find it after decades of not having it, it feels a lot like happiness. That night, I wrote in my journal that true love starts with yourself, and that sometimes the best adventures begin exactly when you think everything is over. The woman who had been humiliated in an airport no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew her value, who was living her dreams, and who finally understood that the most extraordinary life is the one you choose to live for yourself. 2 years later, I was standing on the deck of my private yacht, sailing through the crystal-clear waters of the Mediterranean. Joan was reading a book beside me, while Captain Miller, one of my most trusted employees, guided us toward the next Greek island we wanted to explore. The afternoon sun cast golden reflections on the water, and for a moment, I paused to think about how surreal this new reality felt. My phone vibrated with a message from, surprisingly, Megan. Antonia, I wanted to thank you. Seeing what you did inspired me to leave my abusive husband. I now have my own catering company, and for the first time in 15 years, I feel alive. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to change. I smiled as I read it. In the last 2 years, I had received hundreds of similar messages. Women of all ages who had seen my story in magazines, who had heard about the foundation on the news, who had decided that they, too, deserved more than what they were getting. Each message was a reminder that my pain had served a purpose greater than myself. My relationship with Robert had found a new and surprisingly healthy balance. We saw each other every 2 weeks for dinner, but on my turf, on my terms, and at places of my choosing. He had started therapy to understand how he had allowed his marriage to damage our relationship. Claire had finally understood that her past behavior was unacceptable, and while our relationship would never be warm, it was at least respectful. She had learned to call me by my name instead of ignoring me, and she no longer gave me orders about plants or chores. "What are you thinking about?" Joan asked, noticing my contemplative smile. "About how strange life is," I replied. The worst day of my existence became the first day of my real life. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would be sailing through Greece on my own yacht, I would have thought they were crazy. Joan closed her book and joined me at the railing. "You know what impresses me most about all this?" "What?" "That you didn't change to get revenge on Robert and Claire. You changed for yourself. That's the difference between a real transformation and just a tantrum with money." She was right. For the first few months after the airport incident, I had been tempted to use my new wealth to make Robert and Claire pay for their cruelty. I could have gotten Robert fired. I could have made Claire feel as small as I had felt, but I had learned something important. Revenge keeps you tethered to your pain, while liberation allows you to move on. That evening, as we dined at a seaside restaurant in Santorini, an older woman approached our table with hesitant steps. She wore a simple but clean dress, and her eyes had that look I knew so well, the look of someone who has lived for too long being invisible. "Are you Antonia Hernandez?" she asked shyly. "I read about you in a magazine my granddaughter showed me. I'm 75, and my family treats me exactly as you described in that interview. Do you really think there's still time for me?" "My dear," I said, taking her wrinkled hand in mine, "life doesn't have an expiration date, only moments of awakening. Yours can be today if you decide it is." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope, not despair. She told me her story over the next 20 minutes. Widowed, financially dependent on her son, treated as a free babysitter for her grandchildren, ignored in important family decisions. "My son tells me I should be grateful he lets me live in his house," she whispered. "But that house was mine before I gave it to him." I gave her my personal card and the contact information for Elena Vargas, the director of my foundation. "Call her tomorrow. We have programs for women in your exact situation. You are not alone, and it is definitely not too late." The woman left with a smile she probably hadn't worn in years, and I felt grateful once again for having turned my pain into purpose. That night I wrote in my journal, "I've discovered that a true legacy isn't the money you leave or the companies you build. It's the number of people you inspire to value themselves. It's showing other women that their story doesn't end when others decide they are no longer important. It's proving that dignity isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim for yourself." The next day, as we sailed toward Mykonos, I received a call from Gustavo with exciting news. "Ma'am, we have several interesting proposals. An international television network wants to do a documentary about your story and the foundation. There's also a publisher who wants to publish a book about your experience, and a group of universities wants you to give lectures on personal reinvention after 60. What's the purpose of all this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. To show the world that reinvention has no age limit, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with the most painful rejections. I looked at the infinite horizon stretching out before us, filled with possibilities I was just beginning to explore. I thought of the Antonia from 2 years ago, the woman who had stood in an airport with a broken heart, feeling as if her life was over. If I could talk to that woman now, I would tell her that the pain she was feeling wasn't the end of her story, but the prologue to the best part. Tell them yes to everything, I replied, but with one condition. The message must be crystal clear. No matter how old you are, no matter how long you've lived for others, no matter how many times you've been made to feel invisible or insignificant, it is never too late to choose to live for yourself. Joan applauded from her chair. Now that's a lecture worth hearing. That afternoon, as the yacht rocked gently in the bay's waters, I received an unexpected call from Robert. His voice sounded different, more mature, more reflective. Mom, I wanted to tell you something. Claire and I are seeing a marriage counselor. We're working on our behavioral patterns, especially how we treat the people we love. I'm glad to hear that, Robert. And I wanted to ask you something. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me completely? The question took me by surprise. I had been so focused on rebuilding my own life that I hadn't thought much about forgiveness. Robert, I said after a moment, I have already forgiven you, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean allowing the same behavior to happen again. It means choosing not to carry resentment because it's too heavy for the new life I'm building. And us? Our relationship? Our relationship is better now than it has ever been because it's finally based on mutual respect instead of my desperation for your approval. When I hung up, I realized that conversation had marked the final closure of my old life. I was no longer the mother begging for crumbs of attention. I was a whole woman who chose to have a healthy relationship with her adult son. At sunset, as I watched the sun sink into the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought of all the women who at this very moment feel invisible, who believe their best days are behind them, who think they don't deserve more than what they're getting. Because that was the truth I had learned at 69, when a cruel rejection gave me back the greatest gift of all, my own life, finally lived on my own terms.